Hey there, everyone. My name is Bernadette Smith. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I've found is that there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for DEI stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these inclusive actions and policies within your own organization to help you build a more inclusive world. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Lisa Flick Wilson, she, her, consultant at the Radical Optimist Collective. This week, our conversation is about marriage equality in Liechtenstein, the first Vietnamese WNBA player, an inclusive art exhibit, and more. Welcome to the show, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining me. Can you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Totally, completely. Well, I am here in Atlanta, Georgia, which I think is also a huge part of my own personal story, but it is an amazing place to live, to raise a family, and to be centered in the work of equity and inclusion and belonging. Sometimes it's hard to say because I'm part of this collective that I feel so kind of pinch myself, proud and joyous to be part of, called Radical Optimist. Our work focuses on racial healing. So while it's in the kind of bigger orbit of DEI, BJ, really takes kind of a healing framework, which means that we're kind of going way down to the root, which is really where our name comes from. So Radical Optimist means that we highly believe in possibility, but you got to go through pain or hold pain at the same time to get there. And so that's the radical part of it. And that's me, that's us. And then there's also some parallel efforts we can talk about as part of the process that deals with some affinity spaces that we also hold.
You know, I love, first of all, I love you.
I love you too.
We've been friends for so long, met at my first job outside of college. I don't know, it wasn't yours, right?
But AmeriCorps-ish, let's say
yeah.
ish.
And you've always been a role model to me. You've always been a possibility model to me. And it's really cool seeing how our careers have taken sort of parallel paths eventually.
Oh, you love it.
And I just really want to acknowledge you for sort of showing me as a young baby lesbian the way back then, and showing me a sense of what my possibilities could be. So I just really want to say that because you mean so much to me, and you always have.
Well, right back at you. I would honestly, if I could ever share a cubicle with someone ever again, you would be top of the list.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, let's hope that neither of us have to share cubicles with anyone ever again.
That's the success model.
Well, let's get into a little bit of your background and what I wrote about in this week's 5 Things. So in the newsletter this week, I shared a story about how my son called me out. I have a 13-year-old son. I know you have kids who are first years in college. Well, my son Patrick and I were at a fast food restaurant that wasn't moving very fast, and we're on the way to an appointment, and I was starting to get impatient. And Patrick turned to me and he said, "Mom, don't go all Karen on them." Now I had to laugh, but also that boy called me out, which I love. He is a sassy teenager, but I also never want to go Karen on anybody. So I really appreciate that he checked me. And I guess I should put the definition of Karen and make sure that gets in the show notes so folks know what I'm referring to. But I don't want to ever be perceived like that. And I think it's just really important to stay mindful and get checked and have people around us who aren't afraid to call us out, because we're all going to, lose our patience and lose our ability to stay present in the moment.
Totally and completely. And the other beauty of, I think, what Patrick was doing was he was giving you a moment of I'm noticing you're starting to get dysregulated, mom.
That's right.
And so much of that, like, how can I just slow myself down enough for a nanosecond to just take a breath and say, oh, there it is. Little racism's popping up. And again, I don't know what the situation was, but there's a little creeper in there that if I can slow down enough, I can regulate my own behavior before having to have someone else do it.
That's right. And I think it's just so important to have that kind of, to have people around us who are checking us, and also to really know that people are watching. Like, when every relationship that we have, every single one, people are paying attention to our behavior. 100%. Every single relationship. I mean, there's some sort of like quantum field dynamic about it as well, right? We're all entangled, and we affect others whether or not we want to admit it.
Completely.
Yeah. So, I know that you've done a lot of this racial healing work in the past few years. We're coming up on the anniversary of the racial justice uprisings here in the US and the murder of George Floyd. And I know that you are called, the Radical Optimist Collective. So tell me, especially amidst this sort of DEI retraction, what is continuing to keep you optimistic, Lisa?
Yeah. Honestly, I think we've seen a few things. You've definitely seen a clawback on certain things and a wavering of attention and focus. Mm-hmm. But I also, at the same time, you see people who are doubling down and tripling down.
Right.
You see organizations who are like, so one of the things that we say, and it is not a slogan, it's not a bumper sticker, it's not BS. It is that we really do believe in working ourselves out of a job when we're working inside of an organization. That means that we're measured by you building the muscles to do this for yourself. Mm-hmm. And so what we've seen in some of our longer standing relationships are people doing that, right? Are people like, oh, we have these muscles now. We have an internal core team that's dedicated to a whole host of issues around voice and belonging. You're seeing people who are going back to some of the initial kind of cultural assessments that we do for folks. We really love listening. Mm-hmm. Intuition is kind of one of our superpowers. And going back to those and saying, like, kind of, where are we? Like, that gives me huge hope. The legacy sites in Montgomery, Alabama are full to the brim. Like, it's so exciting to see people traversing across the country into places where, many people roll up into Montgomery and they're looking over one shoulder going, do I need to watch it or I am? Mm-hmm. And these sites have inspired a deeper level of racial reckoning than, again, we've done work in context of them since 2018, and it's just powerful to see. So all of those are giving me hope. And to your point around Patrick, like my own young people and all of what we've seen on college campuses, like that's all of that, even though it's kind of in a different political vein and realm, really the core roots are around like, how do we create these places where people can belong based on where they're coming from? So all of those are giving me a lot of hope.
I love it. And I especially love that you're basically working yourself out of a job because your clients or your partners are focused on systems change, right? Because when we actually work on the root cause and we work on the systems change, which is a lot of what I write about in 5 Things, then we can actually create changes that are more sustainable.
Totally. Well, and I will say, and Bernadette, you and I know this from our background, but one of the things, honestly, that frustrated me about the nonprofit sector was the slogan. Mm-hmm. That was not the reality, right? The reality was a bigger strategic plan. It was more things. Progress was bigger, better, larger. And I was like, wait a minute, if we're working ourselves out of a job, shouldn't our budget go the other way or this way? Anyway, it was it. Yeah. So we feel very strongly about that.
Yeah. You lasted a lot longer in the nonprofit sector than I did.
Done with that now. Good.
All right. Well, let's get into this week's stories. The first story this week comes from the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, which is now showcasing over 80 pieces by artists with developmental disabilities in this exhibit called Creative Growth, The House That Art Built. So this exhibit features artists from Oakland's Creative Growth Art Center, and the exhibit contains 150 pieces of art by people with developmental disabilities. I love this. Amplification.
Totally. Completely.
Really?
I think the part that comes out to me for that was a little bit this both end of like, yes, we do need to concentrate on people who have been outliers. And then there's part of me, I've been on an arts board for a long time, that I was like, part of me that also wants a little bit of that, like, kind of mainstreaming, artists around, like, well, does it matter what like, it doesn't matter how you present it.
The integration.
Exactly. So I read that story and I was like, that's awesome, because we do need to concentrate and allow people to have accessibility and inroads into these places that have not always been accessible. And then there's another piece around, like, I even almost shot up a note to our ED showing, I will be doing that, sharing the story, just being like, do we work with anybody that has any kind of, whether it's intellectual disabilities or neurodivergence or insert blank.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we need to create that space first and then look to make it the default, like normalize it and have it all just be, but we have to sort of go to the other extreme first, I think, to then come back to a little bit of center.
Totally agree.
Okay, the second story this week comes from Frontier Co-op, which is based in Iowa. It's an Iowa-based herbs and spices manufacturer with 550 employees, with 110 children on their on-site childcare premise that they themselves own and run. So it's not something that's outsourced to a third party. It's something that they themselves do, that they've done for a long time, since the 1980s. And it only costs their employees about $2 an hour per kid to get this on-site childcare at this manufacturing plant in Iowa. And I just think that it's such a great story, because we need to take care of caregivers.
Oh my gosh, 1,000,000%. And so twin mama. So, like, the expense of childcare in those young ages, and the ability to have on site for, like, well, they're not really sick, but they're just a little weepy this morning, whatever it is. Like, there's something too, both about the story around just the subsidizing of that major cost, the largest cost at that age. And then also the ability for proximity and just ease in someone's life. And, like, I don't have to, like, schlep to the daycare, to schlep to work, to schlep back to the daycare. And, oh my God, am I going to be late and be charged, an hourly rate for every 5 minutes I'm late? I loved the story.
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely
a major investment of an expense. Like, I mean, I know what that costs. So I'm like, I made me want to go and support that company.
I know, right? That's exactly right. And I'm sure that's not the intention, but it just creates wins all around, which I think is what I try to showcase in 5 things. Okay, the third story this week is from the WNBA. While Caitlin Clark was getting all the hype, Kaylin Trong became the first Vietnamese athlete to play in the WNBA, drafted by the Washington Mystics. She's a 21st overall pick in the second round and is ready to break down the model minority myth about Asian athletes who can and should excel in professional sports. Love this. Only 1.4% of the WNBA is Asian American.
Yeah. First of all, that is ridiculous. I mean, it also then makes me wonder, like, what's our college pipeline look like? Like, who's playing in college? And in this wave of, like, hell yes, women's basketball, all that's going on around that is so inspiring. And then you also have to wonder, like, what really, like, that just where we are in terms of representation.
Yeah, I'm sure that she's going to be a possibility model who hopefully, and her twin sister also plays, but not in the WNBA. But, I hope that she inspires other folks just like Jeremy Lin did. I mean, I watched the documentary on Jeremy Lin, who was a Knicks player. I guess he's not a Knicks player anymore, but anyway, he broke down big stereotypes about Asian athletes in the NBA. And I think that she has the ability to inspire folks similarly.
Completely. I love
All right,
that story.
The fourth story this week comes from the country of Liechtenstein, which has passed a bill legalizing same-sex marriage, making it the 22nd European country and about the 34th in the world to have marriage equality, keeping in mind that there are several dozen countries where it's actually illegal to be gay. Still want to shout out the ones that are passing marriage equality.
Totally. I mean, I'm yay is all I can say. And as you know, I share these stories a lot with younger folks, even, you know, our own children, even though they were part of those early movements, but like all of the things to get to that, whether you're Liechtenstein or some other country who isn't there yet, like I'm just always reminded of all of the other precedents that came before, like the people that were on the registry for civil unions, the people that have had, perhaps they've had, you know, unrecognized same gender adoptions, you know, and all of these things that were precedents that we had to do before. There was a law that was like every single thing was a legal act before you had marriage equality. So I'm like, the more the merrier, bring it on. You know, it is so necessary, and also leads to so many other, you know, interrogating so many other places where we're keeping people banned or barred or discriminated against.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think this allows folks, again, to sort of see the possibilities, see what the possibilities are for families. Certainly legal protections are priceless, especially when there are places where you can't even be authentically yourself. And so, you know, even though there are now 34 countries, I still have to celebrate all of these wins. I mean, there are big battles to get to this point. I mean, this is something that I think here we've started to take for granted, but this is no joke in other parts of the world.
No joke. No joke. I mean, and in some parts of the world, like, you know, arrestable, detainable, executable, you know, much bigger stakes.
Exactly. All right. The last story this week comes from Apple, which has unveiled new accessibility features such as eye tracking for iPads and iPhones, music haptics for the deaf and hard of hearing, vocal shortcuts, and vehicle motion cues. So these are users with physical disabilities. So eye tracking helps them control their devices. Music haptics provides tactile feedback for music lovers who are deaf. And I love how this is just a really inspired use of AI, of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I will totally celebrate anything that is giving more people access to joy. And I love my iPhone.
Totally. Amen. Well, and as a reminder, I think it's also just this beautiful reminder of so much of our kind of broader assistive technologies came from like the disability community, but then were adapted into regular, like large print. Hello, thank you, readers. I mean, different levels of hearing on my AirPod, whatever it is, like it's fantastic. My dear friend, she just lost her mom last year to MS, and she was in a facility for 5 years without the use of her like body, but her brain was as if she was 21. And so all of the assistive technologies that she and her mom could use to communicate just through voice activation alone were phenomenal, you know, and it really does break down this, like these feelings of isolation and increase like, oh, I don't have to be this like other weird person using this adaptive technology. It's just like, okay, let me just flip that switch on. Okay.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And you're right. I mean, even like sort of analog stuff like the curb cutouts just benefits so many folks, right? I think that there's so many examples of I completely agree. So for everyone, again, like win-wins. That's how it should be.
Win-win.
Okay, folks, this week's call to action is about Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Speaking of accessibility, that day was last week. So GAAD, I guess. I should know how that's pronounced. It was last week. So get your organization a free accessibility assessment by our friends at Abler, who train visually impaired folks to perform accessibility audits, among other amazing things. So I will put that in the show notes. Lisa, it has been so great having you on the show. I absolutely adore you. How can folks get in touch with you?
Oh my God. Well, I will say, speaking of, I don't know, give backs, I'll kind of give back. So our team would like to give the first 5 people that reach out to me on our website and mention the Good Vibes podcast, 20% off a racial healing experience in Montgomery, Alabama. So we are calling you in to experience this for yourselves and as supported by our team. And everything can be found. So all of that information and the contact form can be found through our website at radicaloptimist.com. Sorry. Radical
All
Optimist.
Right.
So yeah,
I
first 5 organizations or companies that reach out and mention your podcast. We'd love to have you in Montgomery.
Awesome.
At 20% off.
Well, I'm going to have to experience that with you as well.
Bring the whole team.
Yeah. Would love to. Would love to. All right, folks, if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Thank you so much and have a great week.
Thanks, y'all.